listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode 91 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is Curtis Bradford. Curtis has had roles formerly with New South Wales Rugby, Leicester Tigers, and the Welsh Rugby Union. He currently heads up Rugby Austria's Sevens program, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, Curtis.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, no worries. Knowing that you're based in Austria, I lived there for 6 months, so I couldn't help but get you on and, reminisce. It was another life ago for me when I lived in Kitzbühel, but it's an amazing country.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It really is. I mean, the rugby side of it has a lot to develop and grow, but as a place to live, it's really amazing and beautiful. So yeah. Very lucky.
Yeah, I couldn't get enough of the schnitzels and some of the stuff that goes with living in a country like that. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's all the kuchen for me. It's going to my girlfriend's parents, and I get very well fed there, that's for sure.
Nice, perfect. All right, on to your playing background. What's a bit of a story there with, and how'd you start and how'd you progress?
Yeah, sure. So I guess firstly, I've got to say I listen to this podcast quite a lot, and I hear a lot of coaches who were former players say how they were average rugby players, despite the fact they played professionally. I was definitely an average player, and I think average is probably being polite. But I just loved playing. So I think I started as a 9-year-old in school, and then, it was just really lucky sort of through playing. Things kind of snowballed, and then, got to travel a little bit through playing, and then that sort of fell into coaching. And I've just been really lucky, I suppose, the opportunities it's afforded me just from being a little kid running around in the garden trying to be Shane Williams,
Yeah, well, you couldn't pick a better role model there for sure.
Yeah.
And what about those first coaching experiences? What were they like, and what were some of the big learnings and reflections there?
Yeah, well, I started, I think first time I coached I was probably about 17, and I'd got injured that season, and just sort of started helping out with the junior teams at my local club. I guess through that, I got an opportunity to go to the Åland Islands, which is a little island between Sweden and Finland.
Right.
And I went there as a player coach when I was about 20 years old. So this was my first time sort of coaching adults and coaching men. And it was made easier through being a player as well. But we had some relative success, and I think my ego just kind of inflated a lot, and I thought, this coaching stuff's pretty good, and then from there
easy,
I came.
No worries.
No worries at all. Yeah, and then I came back and I worked for the Welsh Rugby Union for I think 2 years, and then I was working at my local club, and I was also based in the school where I was a pupil. So after sort of 2 years there, I kind of felt, but I had one way of doing things, one sort of style of play, one philosophy that I'd always been around, and I wanted to try and further my knowledge, I suppose. So then I went and I took a short-term contract as a coach primarily, but also played a bit in Kuala Lumpur for Kuala Lumpur Tigers, who were a partner club of Leicester Tigers. And then from there moved in to a community coach role with New South Wales Rugby, and I was coaching up in Byron Bay as well.
Oh, perfect.
It's not a bad spot.
Yeah, and, couldn't think of much worse.
Yeah. And then it was actually in Byron then I sort of had my last big injury, which kind of finished off what was my playing days, I suppose. And then I just focused fully on the coaching and wound up in Austria. But I think when I just talking about all that, I think back to those early experiences, and some of the things I would have thought I was a pretty gun coach in the early days, but really look back now and cringe pretty hard at some of the things I would have said and done. And I hope that's a sign of growth, but I guess we need to see.
Yeah, definitely a sign of growth, and we've definitely all been there, just in different scenarios in one way or another. Yeah, and it's pretty cool. You've done loads of coaching in different countries. What have been some of the big takeaways of that global experience?
Yeah, well, I think the big similarities are the passion for the game. I think even if rugby is not particularly big or has a particularly big profile in a country, the people who are involved in the game have a huge passion for it and a huge love and desire to do well. So I think that's probably the similarities. But I think the big difference is, they're kind of, I suppose, cliches, So, for example, coaching in Wales, Welsh people are very emotive and very passionate, and then you sort of compare that with Australia, where everyone's kind of laid back. And I'd turn up for training like 2 hours early to set up cones and stuff, and you'd get boys turn up 20 minutes late, just come off the waves and straight into it. And then also coaching in Scandinavia, they were very efficient, and it was about getting the most out of the time you had with the players. And then Malaysia, it was almost completely the opposite. They wanted to train long hours, train very often, and try and just, I guess, outwork everyone else was kind of their mindset. Whereas, so you kind of have to adapt to that as you go, and you have to get your feet on the ground really quickly and work out how these little differences affect how you're going to coach the team.
Yeah, that's really cool, and that comes down to profiling your team as well and doing a bit of due process before taking on roles.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's quite difficult at times especially when I first sort of went overseas and just kind of thought there was one way to play rugby. I was pretty naive in that sense, and I remember going to Scandinavia, and I think. So I was playing as a fly half there, and I was thinking pretty much, but okay, these are the plays I'm going to run. I'm going to have this kind of center outside me, and it was all very naive and turned up, and we had about maybe...
You didn't have a center.
Yeah. So the center was actually converted from last year as a hooker, and then we had I think 15 players in the squad. Maybe 6 of them were prop forwards, and so I quickly tore up the playbook and started again. And but I think these are all little things you kind of learn through experiences, I suppose. And there's a lot of trial and error along the way as well. But I think through doing it more often now and gone to quite a few different places, I kind of know to expect that as well. Yeah. So then the first few weeks, I'm just kind of looking out for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really good advice too. What about the role with Austria? How did that come about? How did you end up being over in Europe coaching?
Yeah, so it's a pretty bizarre one, and I'll try and keep the story short. But I was finishing up in Australia. Just finished the season with Byron Bay, and I'd really enjoyed it, but I wanted to be a bit closer to home in the UK. So I was floating my CV around, and people were passing it on sort of throughout clubs in the UK and Europe. And then one day I just got a email. I was backpacking, and I was up by the Great Barrier Reef, and I got a email from Rugby Austria, from the technical director, just saying would I be interested in having an interview. And I was in a youth hostel at the time, and
it's going to be tricky.
Yeah, it was right next to a nightclub, so there's people on the beers all day, and try to find a quiet spot to
good luck.
Exactly. Try to find a quiet spot to have this meeting. And I just remember as soon as the Skype call went through and his face popped up on the screen, there was just like an announcement on the tannoy. Oh, yes, it's ladies' night. Get down to the bar. I just remember thinking, I've blown this. And then I went to Uluru, and this was a few days after then. So I was just in the outback and had no signal, and I was waiting to hear if I'd got the job, and I was like climbing on top of rocks trying to get signal and stuff. So but it all moved pretty quick after that, and I flew over a few weeks later, and that was in, I think, the autumn of 2018. So right. Kind of been here since. And initially I was coming over to be the head coach of the men's sevens and the attack coach for the men's 15s.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of snowballed. But now I take all the sevens programs, so the men, the women, and kind of overlook what's going on with the under 18s as well.
Okay, cool.
And then, still working with the 15s when we eventually get back, because obviously through COVID, we haven't been together as a squad for a long time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's pretty comprehensive. And you kind of touch a little bit on what the landscape's like there. What's a bit more detail on the rugby landscape in Austria?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with the national teams, I suppose. So we play in the Rugby Europe competitions.
Yep.
So we currently run a men's and women's sevens program. Also a men's 15s team.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have an under 18s boys and girls sevens team.
Right.
And then domestically, women sort of exclusively play sevens. So there's no women's 15s domestically. And the men have a small 15s competition, which I think this year is at 6 teams in the competition. Okay. And then they have a 7 series where you could have anywhere between 5 and 12 teams. So you tend to get a lot of, on the men's side anyway, you tend to get a lot of smaller clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And they try and, I suppose, work together. Sometimes they form like franchises and things so that they can compete. Obviously with COVID this year as well, it's making things a little bit harder. I think some clubs are reporting that their playing numbers will be down when they're back. And at the minute we have like a pretty extensive testing concept that you have to follow if you want to be involved with sport. So I think for some people that's made it quite a serious commitment rather than just, turning up for training, having a beer and all that social side of it. Now it's sort of very professional, I suppose would be the word, in terms of how they approach the training and how they approach games, even for the lower level clubs.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I always think especially with sevens, in a country where rugby is not the bread and butter sport, there's got to be some great opportunities to get athletes crossing over from other sports. What's been your experience there? Who have been some of the players who have crossed over from other sports that have had success?
We've kind of had, I mean, not too many high profile or anything like that, but we've had, quite a few soccer players sort of transfer over. We've had a couple of handball players.
Yeah, right.
Volleyball's quite a big sport here, so you get a couple of players from there. But yeah, everyone's into their winter sports here, so I think everyone's got some experience in that, or at least most people.
Yeah.
But we haven't really had the amount of people crossing over from other sports as maybe we'd like, and I think it's something that we could probably target a bit more as well moving forward. Like when we come out of COVID, especially, is I think COVID will kind of at the grassroots will provide quite a lot of opportunity where maybe people want to try a different sport. Maybe some people after so long not doing anything are going to come into sport having not played sport since maybe school or something. So I think we have a few opportunities for recruitment coming out of COVID. So I think it will be quite interesting to see if we snap up any, good athletes from other sports.
Yeah, when I was writing that question, I was thinking exactly handball, because I know it's a bit of a mega sport, more so up in Scandinavia, and I think Germany as well. It's pretty big. Yeah. But I often use European handball as a warm-up game, and there's a lot of similarities there with space and some principles of play that you can attach to it.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, basketball's the other one as well. We've had one or two guys in the club team. So I'm also working with a club team here at Graz, and we've had a couple of basketball players come over as well. And it's really interesting to see, their appreciation of space and their work rate off the ball. These are kind of the things that not everyone would notice unless you're really looking for it, I suppose. But they're, I find that really interesting from other sports, how those core skills, I guess, translate.
Awesome. And so what about Rugby Austria in terms of sevens? What have been some of the goals that have been set for the union, and what are some of the processes that you're going through to try and achieve them?
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer that in two parts. So I'll talk about the women and girls. So we have a pretty talented squad right now and some promising players coming through.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of this program, we obviously want to be successful on the pitch, but we had to ensure that we have sustained success. So we're not just rushing it and trying to be successful this year and then get promoted maybe and then get relegated immediately. So we want to have sustained success so these players can get promoted, sure, but then they can stay at that level and build to climb the ladder even further. So, and to do that, we need to closely align with age grade pathways, with the club coaches to ensure that we've got a growing player pool and that these players are constantly improving, when they're with their clubs, the better players from there coming into the national team. And then obviously if you've got more players to choose from, then that obviously builds competition. And for me, this is the way we can grow the women's game. And I think the other thing as well that's worth mentioning is Donau Vienna is the big club in Vienna and in women's rugby. I think they dominate the women's sevens competition. So that's obviously great. And most of our players for the national team come from this club. So it's a good breeding ground for our national team players. But ultimately, if we want our national team to be successful, we need the domestic competition to be competitive.
Yeah.
So I think that will be where we spend a lot of time and effort in the coming years, is trying to grow the domestic level for women's sevens, so that then we probably get again a higher quality product domestically, and then the cream rises to the top then, and we take the better players with the national team. And I think through that then becomes sustainable, and hopefully we can see Austria promoting to the next level of Rugby Europe competition, and then hopefully be a regular at that level. And with the men, it's slightly different. In the past, I think sevens and 15s have worked kind of separately, and there was not much cooperation between the two potentially. I mean, I wasn't involved, but this is just my sort of interpretation. I could be wrong. But now between me and David Holby, so David Holby is the men's 15s head coach, but he is also my assistant coach for sevens. So we kind of have a good correlation between the two programs, because obviously we're both involved in both programs. So we want to make it so that the two programs complement each other. So you'll know yourself that the core skills in rugby 15s are never under the microscope as much as they are in sevens. And so for me, I think exposing the 15s players to sevens is only going to sharpen those skills and help them when they go into the 15s program. And similarly, I think players that aspire to play in the men's 15s team can benefit from being on the sevens team as well. Almost, I don't want to say as a stepping stone, but I think it's probably a good pathway for them as well. But that also helps the sevens team be successful, because then you're getting the either the most promising players or the best players available to play for the sevens program as well, which I think will be helpful for us. And I think ultimately for Rugby Austria to be successful at 15s and the men's side, we need the sevens program to also be successful. So the two kind of go hand in hand for me.
Yeah, no, I see a lot of parallels from what you're explaining there in Austria to what happens here in Canada, especially in terms of bringing that domestic competition up and the standards of that improving. I think a big missing piece for that is coach development, and that it's challenging in a country the size of Canada, but still there needs to be more of it. How's Rugby Austria looking at that in terms of upskilling their domestic coaches especially?
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's something we've been talking about quite a lot recently. So we have mainly got the issue, I suppose, that to get qualified, you need a World Rugby educator to run the courses, and I think we only have the one in Austria, so that's quite problematic. But having said that, we do have a lot of qualified coaches. I mean, I can't give you an exact number, but we have a lot of people who've got the qualification, maybe level 1 coach. but these people then, they're not actively coaching, or maybe they coach for a year and then they stop. And so I think maybe where we need to spend time working is, how do you upskill the coaches you've got? So maybe you motivate them to stay in coaching, but also the ones that are staying in coaching, they're then developing, they're improving, and then obviously the sessions and the programs they're delivering are improving as a result of that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a tricky challenge, especially with the certification. I think a lot of coaches will just want that certification and tick it off, and that's
exactly
one and done. And it's changing that mindset that it's got to be an ongoing process.
I think that's it, because that's kind of I was speaking about this in a meeting the other day. I think that is kind of the mindset, and I can relate to it as well, because I kind of would get level 1, and then I was like, well, yeah, I'm level 1 for a bit, and then I got to level 2 and level 3, and it kind of like snowballed. But for a while, you're always pretty happy, but you've done that course, and then you're relieved, and you don't want to do another course. So I think what we maybe need to try and get away from is the idea that certification is the big thing. It's more acquiring the knowledge and developing and improving yourself. And I think this is important for coaches to want to improve yourself, because ultimately the better your players get, the better coaching they need, So I think you need to be constantly challenging yourself as a coach. And I think that's where we probably need to have a little bit of a conversation in Austria. How do we help with that? So is that national team coaches running clinics, or getting all the Premiership coaches together for sort of best practice and talking about ideas, but there needs to be something, I feel, just to help the coaches that want to develop and want to improve to have that opportunity, so that they can be as good as they can possibly be. And then hopefully that translates then to players improving and players getting, a better level of coaching, and the level growing that way as well.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, a rising tide lifts all boats. And if you're coaching well, your athletes are going to be in a better learning environment. You touched a little bit earlier on how you started as a coach and what those experiences were, and some of the things that you did right or wrong. What about now? How would you describe yourself as a coach now? What are some of the things that you do on a daily basis that would make it that way? Yeah,
well, I think the big thing that most people would say about me, if you ask them, I think, is that I'm very competitive. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's taken over a little bit. And so I think that's something where, for me, it's a constant sort of battle, because to a certain extent, if that's part of your personality, I think you just have to own it and say, yeah, I am this ultra competitive guy, and that can't change. But then at the other point, I think it can be counterproductive. So sometimes I try to keep that in check a little bit. But I think aside from that, I like to have fun, mate. At the end of the day, we're playing a game. So I try to make it as fun as possible. And I also think that the more fun I have, the better I actually coach. So I try and do things that, keep me enjoying it and motivated myself. And then that allows me, I think, to better motivate the players. And I got a good bit of advice once from a coach who said, if you were a player, would you like to be coached by you?
Yeah.
And I think this is a good question to ask yourself. And I think when I look back at, to the early days and stuff, like when I was coaching for the first time, it was all about winning, and the sessions probably weren't that enjoyable. It was all sort of mapping our way to how we were going to win, basically.
Yeah.
And some people enjoy that, but some people don't. And I think my sessions now, I would say, are a bit more balanced. There'd be hopefully something for everyone. And so whether you've got that club player who, is there for the social aspect and wants to run around for a bit and then have a beer, we're playing games and it's enjoyable, and we're laughing and joking. But then that player who potentially is motivated to, move on and get in the national teams, maybe you need that little bit more detail, and you need to be putting a session that's challenging for him as well. So that's kind of the challenge I find working with the club team here is to strike that balance. But I think that ultimately, even if I was to take the next step up and say I was working in a full-time professional team, I would still try and maintain that balance, I think, because you got to have that fun. And if you can keep that fun element and remember that you are playing a game, and then I think that everyone's having a better time. And I think if people are enjoying it and they want to come to training and they want to be a part of it, then ultimately that's going to lift the level, and I think that's a big part of it, something I've really looked at.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like, as you go up the levels, the fun shouldn't stop. The rugby landscape's littered with players and coaches who actually don't really enjoy what they're doing. And the higher you go up in the levels, the more common that seems to be. And it should be the funnest couple of hours of your day practice. It shouldn't be something that you drag yourself to. And you shouldn't have someone, you talk about, would you like to be coached by yourself? In my first year of coaching, I definitely would have quit if I was a player. Hopefully now, though, I'd stick around. But it's so important. Those human skills are the most important part of coaching, not the technical, tactical skills.
And I think that's the thing I've noticed, that the higher up the levels I go, you actually end up doing a lot less technical coaching. Like, I think you do, of course, you are, delivering sessions and you are talking and giving advice and feedback. But I actually find that the higher the level, the more those relationships are and the questions you ask people. So having a conversation, not just about rugby, but showing people you're actually interested in them as people, but then also showing them that you value their opinion on the rugby as well. So, for example, talking to maybe it's the scrum half at my club or something and saying, what do you think of this pattern we're going to run, or what do you think of our defensive system in this scenario? And this player then I think is, it's not so much what we're doing on the drill. It's just through having this conversation, this player is thinking and hopefully learning. And also I'm learning from that, because I'm getting sort of an idea of what this player's thinking is and how this player sees the game and how that's going to come into our team, and I think that's the part of coaching where I've really tried to improve over the last few years, because I did in the early days, like I say, think, we make a training session around the tactics and we deliver the tactics, and I'll shout a little bit and everyone will be motivated and we'll go home and we win the championship. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. So I think that's probably the big learning, and hopefully if people were talking about me as a coach now, they would say it's someone who puts a lot of time and effort in the relationships, hopefully knows his technical stuff as well, but tries to challenge the players and make the players comfortable being uncomfortable is the phrase we use quite a lot. So if we're comfortable doing the things that make us uncomfortable in a game, we're going to be used to those pressure situations and that are able to execute. And I think a lot of people can do that in fun ways. You can structure a session around that and make it enjoyable. And I think that's probably the area I've really tried to focus on in the last 2 years as well.
Cool. All right. Well, final question before we wrap things up. You've got a lot of plates spinning at the moment with your role with Sevens head coach, 15s assistant coach, and your role with your club as well. That's a lot of coaching. That's a lot of mental bandwidth being given up to the sport. When you do get that chance to switch off and decompress and relax, how do you manage that time? Yeah,
well, I think, like I said, it's I'm very competitive, so it's usually around other sports, to be fair. So I like to play a bit of basketball and like to follow other sports. Me and my brother are big NBA fans at the minute, so we've been following that pretty closely. But I think the big thing through COVID as well was just trying to improve as a person. And I know when people talk of things like that, some people think it's a little bit corny or
bit fluffy,
but a little bit. But I think it's something I really try to focus on and cool. Sort of improve some gaps in my knowledge potentially, and also just in the way I sort of enjoy that downtime, because again, that's something where I would constantly 24 hours a day be thinking about coaching. So I think that's something I've really tried to separate, and I guess compartmentalize different aspects of my life. So this is my time with family. This is my time with friends. This is rugby. And I think when I'm able to do that, I'm better able to put 100% into that. So
yeah,
I think that's been the big thing I've tried to focus on through the pandemic is setting time aside for things other than rugby and try to enjoy them for what they are.
Yeah, no, it's important, especially when you talk about sustainability and staying in the game for as long as possible as a coach. You got to tap out every now and then and
exactly.
Recharge. Awesome. Well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up, who was one of the players that first drew your attention to the game and helped in your journey in falling in love with the sport?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it at the top of the program. For me, it was Shane Williams. So I remember we used to live on a bit of a farm, and we had a garden, and all the kids sort of around the area would come and we'd just play rugby. And I think it was the year Wales won the Grand Slam in 2005, and everyone would say, "Oh yeah, I'm Shane Williams, I'm Dwayne Peel," So I would always shotgun to be Shane Williams, and he was a bit of an idol growing up for sure.
Yeah, total legend, and he's actually in my top 3 live rugby moments. I was at Millennium Stadium when they played the Wallabies when he scored his try on his final test match, and it was awesome. It was such a great experience. Like, it was right on full time almost, and he just did what he did, weaved his way through, and it was a really special moment.
Yeah, there wasn't a dry eye in my house that day, I don't think.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I was also there the year after where Kurtley Beale scored in the dying minutes too. So
yeah, let's not talk about that one.
All right, what about now? Who are some of the players going around that you like what they're doing?
Yeah, I think for similar reasons probably, but I think Cheslin Colby is a player I just love watching, and
amazing.
And I think Dupont is just magic to watch as well, isn't
Brilliant.
he? Dupont.
Yeah.
So I think these are the 2 players. They're just getting you out of your seat to watch a game, and I think this is, especially talking about growing rugby's profile and things. These are the type of players that sport needs, and I think they throw up some magic moments. That's for sure.
Yeah, and Dupont, he's just going to take scrum half play to a ridiculous level now.
I think so, yeah. I think so.
And what about coaches? What about high-profile coaches? Who are some of the ones that you look up to and respect what they're doing?
Yeah, I've got to give a shout-out to Gareth Williams. So he's the Welsh under-20s coach at the minute.
Nice.
So he actually coached me when I was 15 in the county setup in Wales, and I think he's just a great guy and someone who's doing a lot of good things. And I'd also say Pat Lamb, Bristol. Yeah. I think I just really like his, when you hear him speak about the game and his philosophy around the game, and I think he just has so many great ideas. So I think I would say he's probably one of the best coaches in Europe at the minute, and I don't think it'll be too long before Bristol start winning things under him.
Yeah, I agree. What about locally? Final question: who's someone in the grassroots in your community that's doing good work and deserves some recognition? Yeah,
so I'll go back home to Wales for that one. So we have a guy called Di Jones, and he's the local pub landlord. So hopefully he shouts me a beer after when I get back eventually. But through lockdown, he was doing a lot of like one-to-one sessions, and he started up his sort of social media profile, DP3 Coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's doing a lot of good work, and a lot of local people, even non-rugby players, having good one-to-one coaching from him and session plans and ideas. So I think he's doing a great job.
Awesome. It's a good way to wrap things up, and I want to thank you for your time. It was a great chat. Got a little bit nostalgic there about living in Austria. It's an awesome country. I'd love to go back there with the kids one day and show them around. So all the best with the coaching. I'm stoked to hear that things are loosening up there, and hopefully you'll be back on the field soon with the players. And thanks again.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Cool. No worries. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at RugbyCoachesCNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.